That's kind of the lesson I've learned in self-acceptance. Everybody is a function of life. And maybe it's even bigger than we think it is, right? And being able to say, okay, I'm going to find what that is for me. Hi, welcome to DocWorking, the Whole Physician podcast. My name is Gabriella Dennery MD, one of the lead coaches at DocWorking.com. And thank you for joining us today. We actually have a special edition of the podcast today. This is in response to one of our listeners who had a request. And so we're going to talk about resolving guilt with leaving medicine. So that's the topic of our podcast today. And I've invited the person who frankly knows me the best in the entire world to have a discussion about this today. And so I'm so excited to introduce to you Gina Jefferson, who is a licensed clinical social worker, with a master's in education, interfaith minister, and who also happens to be my spouse. And so welcome, Gina, to the DocWorking podcast, and thank you for being my interviewer.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. This is going to be fun.
It sure is. And this is, as I said, one of the listeners who responded to one of our podcasts called 3 Things I Wish I Knew, when I was talking about some of the lessons I learned along the way that, I know now that I wish I knew back then, but it's good that I learned them, right? And one of the things was with the first lesson, I'd mentioned that it helped me in releasing some of the guilt I felt with leaving medicine. And that caught our listener's ear. And so she wanted to know more about that. And so that's what we're addressing today. So I'm going to pass the mic back to you, Gina, and let you take it.
Okay. So when you were talking about guilt in leaving clinical medicine, tell us a little bit more about how that topic came up.
Well, I burnt out. I really did. I was in primary care medicine. My specialty was internal medicine. And I did that for 7 years. But I can say that really the burnout process for me, it was started in residency. And it got kind of carried forward and it kind of piled on and piled on and piled on. And I just got to the point where I knew I had to make a change if I wanted to live a different kind of life. Now, did it mean leaving medicine? For some people, it doesn't. But for me, it did. Leaving clinical medicine, it did. And I really got to the point where to save my own life, I had to make that decision. And so that's what kind of pushed me out of medicine. But I have to say that it wasn't just a push, there was a pull. And so on the other hand, I'm also a musician and a composer. And I've been that my entire life, almost as long, if not as long as I've wanted to be a doctor. And so there came a point where I was starting to perform more and I was learning about African drumming and I was teaching and that was pulling me out. I really, really wanted to pursue that more full time. And I figured, if not now, when? And so there were those two kind of competing reasons why, well, not competing, I guess they complemented each other. Because it was time to leave.
I mean, music is healing also, right? And I know that you felt called to medicine.
Yeah.
To practice medicine. So tell me a little bit about that calling and what happened with it in the midst of the burnout.
Well, that calling started when I was very, very young. I grew up in a family of doctors. Mom is a doc, was a doc, dad was a doc, and they always served. They always were in a capacity of service. So my father was, for example, always involved for many, many, many years, and most of his practice years involved in projects to send medical equipment and hospital equipment to Haiti, which is where my family is from. And so he was always involved in all these kinds of charitable activities in addition to his work as a physician. And mom, too. Mom always served in a very different way. She was always at somebody's bedside, a friend who lost somebody significant in their lives. She was always there for them. She was always there in very kind of quieter ways, but she always had other people's well-being at heart and acted on that. And so both my parents were full-time physicians, full-time parents, and at the same time, practiced medicine. And so those were my role models. That was modeled for me. And so for me, I equated helping people, which is what I wanted to do, with practicing medicine. And so that started really, 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 really early.
Really early. I remember stories about experiments in the house. Was it you that had a brain in the house?
Oh, yeah. Mom was a pathologist.
Gosh.
For a few years before she switched to psychiatry, she was a pathologist. And so I don't know if I had a question about the brain or one of my siblings did or something happened. And so she said, well, I can bring one home. So we said, cool. And she did. It was wrapped up in this plastic, and then around the plastic was this green surgical cloth. And so we would kind of look at this brain and then kind of poke it and go, what is that? Nobody ever cut it, which was good. I'm glad it stayed intact. And eventually she brought it back to the lab. But it's funny. It was funny just having this thing around the house. It's like, wow, this is so cool. Just looking at all the dips and the valleys and the peaks and the perfect division of the two hemispheres and all this wonderfulness. Yeah. And
the fact that you thought it was fun. It's something. Your father was a neurosurgeon.
My father was a neurosurgeon. So we got to talk about these things too. And he kind of showed us a bit of the anatomy of the brain and the different, parts of the cortex. And so it was like, well, this is so cool. And at the same time, I had this fascination with bones. At first, I thought I was going to be an orthopedist, you see. And so, when there was a celebration, I remember one summer, my father was planning this really big party. And so there was this little goat running around the backyard. And so one day there was the goat, and it was there for about 3 days. And after 3 days, there was no more goat. So
gosh,
it ended up on the dinner table.
Oh, gosh.
I didn't witness, I don't know what they did, how they did, but it ended up on the dinner plate. And I know it sounds gross now, but it was actually, Mom could cook a mean goat. She could. And it was good. And I also remember that, I asked my father, keep some of the bones, because I collected the vertebrae and I collected the shoulder blades. And I kept all of that. And I was like, well, this is so cool. And I would ask my father about them. And, so it was a way to have that conversation with my parents and kind of build those bridges with them. And at the same time, it was just my fascination and my curiosity.
So what I'm hearing is that you had that in common with your family. That was a way to bond with your family, this whole idea of medicine and helping people through medicine. And so how did you deal with that as you realized you were burning out from medicine?
I think I was burning out. The thoughts, oh my God. I mean, at first I wasn't really thinking about my parents. And I would like to make sure that it's clear that it took about 10 years to make the decision to leave. It's not something that ever happened overnight. And for various reasons, there was a lot of back and forth. And one of them was feeling guilty because I grew up with that obligation and that responsibility to other people. And so that was part of kind of the culture of the household. You did for others before you did for yourself. That's kind of how I grew up. And for me, as I said, medicine equated helping people. And that's the way I saw it. And that's how I grew up around it. And so to leave, it was kind of breaking the equation. And at the same time, I knew that I was absolutely exhausted. I was exhausted by the procedural stuff, by the administrative stuff, which was not what I thought doctoring was about. And I was also exhausted by this whole idea, and perhaps because it's my pick of specialties. I picked internal medicine because I enjoy working with adults. I do. I still do. At the same time, back in the day, it was called chronic illness management. And to me, it's like, well, that's not why I became a doctor. I thought I was helping people get better. I didn't want to, chronically manage illness. It didn't make sense to me. Like philosophically, it did not make sense to me. Eventually, they changed the lingo to healthcare maintenance. But basically, it's the same thing.
Got it. Yeah.
So there was those kinds of pushes, the administrative exhaustion. And it's like, but this is not what I signed up for when I said I wanted to be a doctor. It's not what I signed up for. And then there was this whole idea of maintaining illness. It just didn't make sense to me. Like I couldn't reconcile with that logically or emotionally in any way, shape, or form. So that wore on my spirit. It did. And over years after year after year after year of health maintenance for chronically ill patients, I had my fill. I really did.
Wow. So was there an avenue available for you to process these feelings of feeling burnt out with your colleagues or supervisors or anything?
I mean, again, it's the administration stuff. It's the medical records, the electronic record, the insurance companies, the prescriptions, the pharmacists, the running around trying to figure everything out. That's what was exhausting. But did I seek support? Is that the question?
Yeah, or was there a process for seeking
Mhm.
support built into, that level of administration, or did you find your own support?
I found my own support and I kind of did it on the down low because I still was personally dealing with the idea that what if somebody finds out that I'm looking for support with my mental wellness and my mental well
Mm,
being? And
that's
what
true.
impact will it have on my career? What
Right.
impact will I have on, my future if somebody
Right.
finds out? I think one of my biggest inspirations for seeking support, particularly working with a therapist, was one of my mentors in the clinic who was also a pediatrician who had left because of burnout, but she came back. And she was very open about the fact that she was in therapy. I was just absolutely amazed by that. I had never seen a physician talk about being in therapy that openly.
Mm,
And it's like,
okay.
are you crazy? Why are you talking so loud about it? But why? Why not?
Hmm.
So to me, that was really my inspiration to say, you know what, I can't do this by myself. I can't resolve all that I'm feeling, the guilt, the anger, the denial, the resistance to, the trying to reconcile why I'm here, because
Hmm.
it made sense when I was 20 years old, 24 years old in medical school, and even in my first year of residency. But after a while, it just stopped making sense. So I needed help and I needed to admit that. And I at least admitted that to myself. So I went out of network. I didn't even want to know that my healthcare network, which was through my employer, knew that I was in therapy. I asked a friend who she would recommend. And so she recommended someone I worked with actually for almost 3 years. She was excellent. And I really appreciated her help. So, really, I think that dealing with guilt with leaving medicine, because that process started in my latter years as a attending physician, it started before I left. And it really helped a lot with resolving the question, should I stay, should I go? And
Mm,
so I appreciated that support, even if it was on the down low. I think it was absolutely important and crucial to recognize that I could not do this by myself. And
right.
yeah, so
Hmm.
I'm grateful I did.
Hmm. Hmm. For sure. I can also imagine that a source of guilt might have been you leaving your patients, because I know you were working in underserved communities. So can you
I
talk a little bit
was.
about that?
Yeah, no, I was. And I made it a point to work in underserved communities. That's always been my mission as a clinician to work in areas where access to care was not a given
Hmm.
and to work with patients who are in need. And I want to be part of that solution. And so that was hard. That was really hard being able to say, well, I'm leaving these patients behind. Yes, logically, they're going to be assigned another physician and that physician is going to bear the brunt, or those physicians are going to have to take on an extra load, which was also part of the guilt. And I'm choosing a different path. I don't know if they'll hire somebody after me. They may or may not, depending on
Mm,
what the budgetary arguments may be.
wow.
Uh, yeah. And at the same time, is the pull strong enough for me to say, I got to live my life? I just
Hmm.
do. Because if I get to live my life, then I think I would have a greater impact on people than if I'm miserable and unhappy and
Hmm.
entertaining suicidal ideations, which is exactly what I was doing.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it was a tough decision, but I had to make.
Hmm. And so what I'm hearing is years of dissatisfaction at work, and I'm sure there were a lot of good things that happened as well, but
Mhm.
I heard you say it was back and forth, back and forth. And then, okay, finally you make the decision. Finally you're leaving. What are people saying? Because I can imagine your parents freaking out.
Well, a Haitian mama and a Haitian papa who was
Well,
like,
yeah, because
yeah.
it says something to family status as Haitian family, a family of color. It says something about, the status that we've brought ourselves to, and now you're leaving.
Oh my
So
God. Are you
tell us
kidding? And
about
I'm
that.
supposed to tell my parents that I'm leaving to become a drummer? I mean, come on now. That has to be a parent's
Exactly.
worst
Worst
nightmare.
nightmare, yes.
Haitian mama and Haitian papa's worst nightmare. But by that time, I was 40 years old, or on the eve of my 40th birthday. And so initially, because I chickened out, I really did. I told them I was on sabbatical. Taking a break. I'm on sabbatical, you know.
The
And
sabbatical.
my siblings knew, and I have 5 siblings, so somebody opened their mouths. I
Okay.
have no doubt.
Uh-huh.
And it
Hmm.
came at one point. It's my father's wife My father's wife, because my parents, my father remarried. They were divorced at one point. My father, I just want to clarify that. My father's second wife, right, who noticed, she said, no. When I was visiting home one time, Gabriella, something is different about you. See, that's what she told me.
Uh-huh.
And I said, well, what's that? You look happy. And I said, oh boy. And then she went to my dad and said, but Gabriella looks happy. Something is different about her. And I heard her say that. So eventually I did let them know. But I said it in a very particular way. I went to my dad first and I told him, and I said, what I really want from you now are your words of support and encouragement, because I have enough worry of my own and enough fears of my own, and I don't need yours too. So please, if you can't say anything good, then please keep it to yourself or talk to my siblings about it, but not to me. And I made the same request of my mother. I was very
Wow.
respectful, very polite, but I made my boundary very clear because I knew my mom is a was a worrywart, professional worrywart. And I know dad didn't say much, but I know he worried too. And, I kept telling me, it's like, I'm a 40-year-old woman, I'm grown, and I will be fine. I will be fine. In the meantime, please, what I want from you are words of encouragement. I just need your encouragement. And you know what happened? And that's the beauty about this, and making it clear to them as to what I wanted from them, not just what I didn't want, but what I wanted from them, is that they actually respected it and they did it. There came a point where, we were performing full time, and you and I were in Grace Drums, which was the name of the group at the time. And I would send them the DVDs of the performance. And dad would be calling me, say, I saw it, and I saw it like 3 times. And okay, for the next performance, this is what you do. Don't forget this. Make sure you do that. So he's giving me tips about what to do on stage. He's not a performer, he's a surgeon. But he was so excited about it. And then her boyfriend, I guess, is that what you would call him? And, she was with him for many, many years. He said, oh, she watched it like multiple times, and she was smiling, and she's so proud of you. And, mom was having health challenges at the time, and so she wasn't verbalizing that. But, it was good to hear, and that feedback was amazing and really, really important, and just so gratifying.
Wow.
That they were able to put their worries aside, honor my request, and support me in the way I asked them to support. So I think that really would be the second thing about releasing guilt, was really honoring what it is I needed and asking for it, which was huge. I wasn't in the habit of asking them for anything really, because I didn't want to impose. They did so much for me already. But that was important, especially when looking at a life transition like that, and such a big life transition. Support is important, really.
Well, it sounds like you had your own support by going to therapy and doing the things that you needed to do to take care of yourself, so you can get to the point of knowing what you needed and setting those clear boundaries. Because it sounds like you were very courageous in being able to do that, but also it sounds like you had some support to get to that point. Because when you said to them, it's going to be okay, I thought, I wonder if you really knew that at that time, right?
I think that's a very strong and insightful observation, because no, I did not know that at that time. I was kind of saying to convince myself and to convince them, but I know I had no clue what was going to happen. Yeah.
So, what did other people say? Like, what did maybe even your colleagues or just other people say? How did they react?
Interestingly enough, physicians were supportive for the most part. I didn't tell everybody, but when I informed people that I had to inform, well, where else are you going to practice so we can make sure we send your patients in that direction? And the answer is, oh, I'm not practicing anymore. I'm complete. And so physicians were like, oh, wow, congratulations. Or better yet, I wish it was me.
Wow.
I got that a lot. I wish it was me.
Wow.
And that was shocking. That was truly, truly shocking. I don't have any other skills. Can't say that drumming was really a marketable skill, but that was how I decided to go. But I don't have any skills. I don't know what else I would do. Or, oh, wow, you're lucky. And wow, I wish it was me. Those were the kinds of responses I got from the physicians. Some I knew, some I didn't know. But that's kind of how it worked out.
So you got, support from your parents. You got support from colleagues. So Why the guilt?
I know it. I mean, everything sounds great. I think there were other encounters that reminded me that that was a tough decision to make. Because so
Mm.
at one point after I left, my legs are still wobbly. I'm not sure what I'm doing next. And
Mm-hmm.
so that uncertainty was added to the guilt because it's like, okay, what did I do? What did I get myself into? Did I make
Right.
the right decision? Oh,
Right.
is it still time to go back? No, I don't want to go back. Now what? I mean,
Yeah.
just added to the confusion, added to the guilt, added to feeling, did I really do the right thing?
Mm.
And then there were these kind of funny encounters that kind of added to the confusion because I was looking for a financial advisor after I left. And so I interviewed several people, and there was this one person who was recommended by a friend of mine, and I went to see him. And so, we talked a little bit, introduced each other. And then he asked me, well, what do you do? I said, well, I'm retired. And he said, well, retired, you're pretty young for that. I said, yeah, well, I didn't have any other vocabulary words to say that, but that's the word I
Mm-hmm.
used at the time. And he said, well, what did you used to do? I said, well, I'm a medical doctor. I practice medicine. Oh my God. That man bolted out of his chair behind the desk. He was
Whoa.
red from head to foot. I've never seen a man so red in my life. And he
Wow.
started pacing across the office. You.
Wow.
You
Wow.
did what?
Oh
you mean
gosh.
you quit? I said, yeah, I did. Oh my God, you could see fumes coming out of his ears. I didn't know the man from Adam. So, it was
Wow.
so, what was funny is that, of course I didn't choose him as my financial advisor. And at at the same time, it's like, wow, this really triggers something in people.
Yeah.
It was shocking. I didn't realize that. To me, I was just like, okay, well, it's my life. I made my decision. And yeah, I have my own qualms and worries about it, and I still feel guilty about it. And then here's somebody who's really just enraged by it. And
Wow.
I was shocked because when somebody makes a big transition like that, and that's probably the other lesson I learned, it kicks up stuff in other people. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, they will react because then that means that maybe they have to look at their own lives,
Mm-hmm.
especially if there's those thoughts of I'm not really happy, but I'm kind of just going through the motions type of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
then when somebody makes a big jump like that, that means that other people have to kind of, do they examine their life? Do they want to examine their life? I mean, I'm wondering if that's the trigger, and it
Mm-hmm.
could be. So just
Mm-hmm.
based on that encounter and others like that, I made a very clear decision. And when I'm making my life transitions, because I've made others after that, when I'm making my life transitions, I either share it with very few people or I don't share it at all. I keep it to myself, at least for a little
Mm.
while. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
that also helped with actually decreasing and resolving and releasing guilt because then the guilt is kind of tied to the fear. And did I do the right thing? And so, when I'm eliminating that question by, kind of limiting who knows and, who has the privilege of knowing that information, because it's a privilege. That's my intimate decision.
Mm-hmm.
It's a privilege to be in that circle of decision. Then if I limit the number of people that are in that circle, then I protect myself.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that actually feels safer and the guilt can't go run amok. So at least that's my
Mm-hmm.
theory and I'm sticking to it.
Well, at least it seems as if that kind of reaction would help you reflect on, where you are with regard to acceptance of your decision. Do
Mm.
you think?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And acceptance is probably a big, fat, capital A word that
Mm.
really encompasses the whole thing about releasing guilt with making a big jump like that.
Mm-hmm.
Learning to accept myself
Mm-hmm.
as I am, quirky and all. I mean, I can swear almost fluently in two languages, and I have vocabulary in a third. I can say some stuff that nobody will understand, and I will never translate. It's fabulous, fabulous. And I'm quirky and I'm creative and I'm curious and I love to learn new things. And, I'm a rhythm master and I love that about,
You are.
thank you. Thank you. I love that about how I hear and feel music in my own body. It's just absolutely amazing. And I love to be able to write that music and compose that music. It's exciting. And life coaching is an exciting conversation because I get to delve in possibility. That was the difference between life coaching and medicine. In life coaching, I can talk about possibility. What is possible for somebody, regardless of circumstances, even within the circumstances, you know? Medicine was all about the circumstances and what was impossible as a result. And so being able to switch that conversation, that's exciting to me. You know, I'm a minister, I'm an ordained minister now. I mean, did I know 10 years ago that I was going to be ordained? No. But that's where my, life carried me and I decided to go with it. And it has enriched my life in so many ways. I'm just ecstatic with where I am now. And what I've learned, I think, is one of my favorite Bible passages, and I can't remember the reference specifically. And this has to do with self acceptance for me, that it talks about the church as God's body. And it says, well, not everyone can be a nose. Not everyone can be an ear. Not everyone can be a foot. You need the nose, the ear, the foot, the mouth, the belly button in it. I mean, I'm kind of exaggerating at this point, but that's the whole idea that everybody, as a friend of mine used to say, has their contract with life. Right. And so, no, not everybody can be a nose. I get to be a belly button. Hallelujah. I'm very grateful about that. And so I think my journey outside of medicine kind of helped me define that moving forward. Like, what else can I be in this world? Knowing that nothing that I experienced goes wasted. Nothing I've learned is wasted. It all somehow all comes together. And at this point in my life, I can say that all these bits and pieces of me, which I thought were bits and pieces, physician, life coach, minister, musician, composer, aspiring gourmet cook.
Doing very well with that one, by the way.
Oh, thank you, darling. Wife, sister, daughter, friend, et cetera, a godmother. It's for all of these hats that I wear personally and professionally. Everything is now coming together so beautifully. They're all kind of coalescing in the middle. And that wouldn't happen if I didn't go on that hunt, if you will, for, where am I in this body? Again, we can't all be noses and we can't all be ears. Somebody's got to be a toe in order for the whole body to function, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the lesson I've learned in self-acceptance. Everybody is a functioning life. And maybe it's even bigger than we think it is, right? And being able to say, okay, I'm going to find what that is for me is a big decision. Wow, and that helps also in just kind of working with the guilt and alleviating the guilt. So self-acceptance really is a huge piece.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So besides the guilt, because I know as a clinician myself, as a psychotherapist, I know that along with guilt, in the process of loss, and you did leave a vision, a title, a career of sorts, you did have a loss. And I know one thing about loss, that guilt is one of the feelings that comes up, but another feeling is grief. Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about where you felt the loss the most and what your experience of grief was?
Oh, that's a big question. I think that because even 16 years out of leaving medicine, there's still that little, and I've done a lot of work. I've done a lot of personal development work, the spiritual work, the therapy. I've worked with life coaches. I've worked with all sorts of wonderful counselors and mentors and people along the way. And so with all of that work, there's still that little vestige of guilt that was still hanging on for some reason. And it's like, why are you still here after all this time? I'm not going back. It's been 16 years. I have a different life and I have a different way of serving now, using everything that I have experienced, and which is the beauty about this. Why am I still feeling a little bit of guilt? And I realized that that's what it was. As we're mourning parents, we lost 3 parents in the same year. In 2019, I lost both of mine. You lost yours. And, really being in that process of grief and allowing the discomfort of it, the annoyance of it, the joy of it, the release of it, the vulnerability of it, right? I realized that I didn't allow myself to do that with medicine, that I
Mm.
spent my time denying, stuffing, pushing it away. Oh, get over it. It's done, it's finished. That part of my life is over. I'm done. I've moved on, et cetera, et cetera. Like for years, I was kind of pretending it didn't exist. But it was such a massive part of my life, not only in terms of the amount of time dedicated to it, the training, the training. We could talk about that for days, but it was the call because, as I said, I associated helping people with medicine. And when I left, I really didn't see how that could be replicated anywhere else. I didn't know at the time. And so that whole process of letting go, which is also a grieving process, I didn't allow myself time to grieve and that luxury of grieving. I just went to the doing. Okay, let's get something done here. Although I had no idea what to do, but let's get something done.
Right. I can only imagine that let's get something done probably was part of what you needed to push you out, right? To keep you.
Absolutely. To keep me busy, keep me focused, hopefully keep me focused. But I think having that realization, which actually came very, very recently, I find that that little piece of guilt that still remained is going away. And that too is exciting to me.
So there was something connected with the grief and the guilt, is what you're saying.
I think so. Yeah.
That's a wonderful distinction that you've made, that part of the grieving process is to allow for the guilt, and part of, the guilt sticking around is because you haven't grieved, so it is something that, no one wants to feel too much because then it might look like regret. Have you had any regrets?
No, not anymore. I did for many, many years, but not anymore. I think that I'm in a place right now, as I said, that all the pieces and parts of me, everything that I love about life are coming together and they're coalescing beautifully. And I didn't force that. It's nothing that I could have planned, but it's just kind of falling into place. And it's a powerful, powerful moment and a powerful place to be. And so that, that comes with the next lesson, I guess, is trusting, trusting that everything will work out, because I can't predict every single detail. Nobody can. Nobody has a crystal ball. You can't foresee what's going to happen. Life is messy. It can be messy and gloriously messy. Grieving is messy, and it comes in waves. One day you're fine. The next day you're like, oh, so it's a messy process, but it is a glorious process. And I finally allowed myself to go through it when it comes to medicine. Now I can appreciate the happy memories. I can appreciate the good times. I can appreciate the laughs. I can appreciate the quirks of some of my patients and some of the most amazing conversations and things that I've learned from them over the years. And, I can appreciate that now. And I did back then, but now more so, because those times were absolutely precious. Yeah.
Okay, so self-acceptance, boundaries, trusting the process. How else do you advise clients when it comes
keep it
to
to yourself? As a way of managing guilt, don't keep the guilt to yourself. On the contrary, seek support. That would be number one. Seek support. A life coach, a therapist, a group of like-minded people. Surround yourself with people who are supportive. And, keep those naysayers at bay and make your boundaries clear, which is what I did with my family, particularly my parents, who, as I said, the professional worrywart. I made it clear what it is that I'm asking of them, which was words of encouragement and support, and what I did not want from them, which was more worry and fear. And I articulated that. I actually said it. And so that made a big difference, so make your boundaries clear. And sometimes if you're contemplating a big jump, then, you may want to keep that to yourself for a little while. Self-acceptance is key. That would be the other point, because it's not possible to beat yourself up and make a move. How are you going to manage both? I mean, I thought I did for a little while, but, I think it's kind of stunted my growth and stunted my progress as I'm still trying to be perfect and do the right thing in the right way, et cetera, et cetera. Kind of old habits from medicine that I carried into music. And it took a while to let go of those habits. So, learning to accept yourself really is probably the first and most important thing of all in any transition. And to allow yourself the beauty of grieving the loss. because it is a loss. And once you go through that grieving process, you start appreciating the beauty that it is, that in the end, I didn't really lose anything. I gained everything. And in addition to my years in medicine, that was a big gain as opposed to a big loss. Mm-hmm. At this point, I can say that now today, which is fabulous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like acknowledging the loss, you also at the same time get to acknowledge what you're grateful for.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And gratitude is also a huge piece of self-acceptance, and being able to break the inner critic is really an active practice of gratitude. And there are many ways of doing it. And it's important because the human mind, we go to worry and fear and doubt. And that's kind of the default position for most people, like for 99% probably of the world population, and so in order to counter that, you actually have to work at it. You have to make it an active practice. And gratitude is one of those big pieces in that active practice. And there's actually research to back that up. It's kind of fun. There's a whole field of gratitude research. And so they concur what the philosophers of old knew all this time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Yes, that gratitude is definitely an old teaching. It goes way back and very wide. Well, this has been amazing, Gabriella. I mean, it's really, some of this I've heard, some of this I haven't heard, and it's really good to really think about, pull apart what themes come up in transitions, because your story is, you were talking about burnout, which led you into transition, but, there's so many even smaller transitions that will kick up guilt, that will kick up, the feelings of grief. And so I think this was a wealth of information for people to digest. Any last thoughts, last words? I hope we talk more about this in the future. Mm-hmm. But any last thoughts before we leave?
Yeah, this is something that you and I talked about before we recorded, was do I have any other suggestions, like practical little tricks to deal with guilt? You know how I've dealt with guilt initially, especially in the earlier years? I would sit in it like a pig in what?
Blank.
Pig in blank. Because making a decision based on guilt, reacting to the guilt and making a decision based on guilt is really rarely a good idea. And making a decision based on any kind of reaction is rarely a good idea. You got to give yourself time to breathe and to stop and really just like, is this a good time? No, let me stop and think about it. Or let me stop and just sit with it for a minute. As I told myself to try this, whenever I feel guilty about something, just sit in it like a pig in blank. You get the idea. And that's what I did. Whenever I felt guilty about anything, really, I would sit with the guilty feeling. It was uncomfortable. It felt icky. I did not like it, but I sat with it because I said, at some point this will go away. And it did. So the first time I tried it, it took literally 3 days for the guilty feeling to finally go away. But it went away. And it was such a release and relief. So then something else happened. I don't even remember what that is. And I felt guilty about that. I felt guilty about just about everything. And so I sat in the guilt again. And next thing you know, instead of being 3 days, it was like 2 days, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I got to the point where I would feel something, maybe a pang of guilt, and it would go away literally in seconds. And it's like, wow, this is so cool. Imagine if you don't run away from an emotion, but really just sit with it for a while.
Yeah.
And see what happens. It will go away.
Is that similar to when they say having a pity party? Having a pity party where you sit in the. No, I'm just saying, like, it just made me think of that, sitting in the pity for a minute, for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, that for a pity party, I would say put it on a clock. Give yourself 5 minutes because you could be there all day. I don't think it works for everything, to be honest, to sit in it, because you could sit in pity all day and all week and all month and all year. And so it's like, you feel bad, you had a rough day, or, something didn't turn out the way you wanted to turn out, or whatever the situation might be. And, why? Be in that for literally, put it on your clock and set it for 5 minutes or 3 minutes or something like that. And then when the alarm goes off, It's like, okay, I'm done. Time to get back to next steps. Because it's in the difficulty that you'll find the solution. The difficulty is what's going to give rise to your creativity. And so it's like, don't shy away from it. Sometimes it's like, okay, this is your perfect opportunity to really start getting creative. So pity yourself for 5 minutes and then move on.
Or sit in the guilt for 5 minutes. I mean, I really think that there's no distinction. Why is it different?
Because you can stew in anger for years. You can stew in self-pity for years. So I don't think it works the same way for everything.
Okay.
But that was my experiment with guilt. And it worked.
I remember a time where I don't think I was having a pity party, but I remember one time I was upset about something and I was complaining. I think it was some negative self-talk. And we were in the car and you said, okay, you've got 5 minutes. And I said, what? And you said, you've got 5 minutes. Go ahead, complain, talk about how bad you were at the event or whatever it was. You said, go ahead, you got 5 minutes and then we're complete. It actually worked for me. I was like, okay, I'm going to take my 5 minutes. And then I was complete.
You can't spend your life in the vent. You can't. Life is too short. Come on now, you got things to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciated it.
Gina, it was a pleasure. Thank you. You were an absolutely masterful interviewer. And I hope that our audience and hopefully the one who actually made the request gets a lot out of this. And for those who are having similar experiences, that they're getting a lot out of this too. And thank you for your time and for this time together. I had a whole lot of fun and I hope you did too. And so thank you all listeners to this podcast. And we will meet soon again.
All right. Thank you. Go DocWorking.
For life coaching on career challenges inside and outside of medicine, for creating healthy boundaries for work-life synergy, putting yourself back in the driver's seat of your life. You can schedule life coaching sessions with me, Gabriella Dennery, at DocWorking.com or by clicking the link below.
Hello, and thank you for listening. This is Amanda Taryn. I'm the producer of the DocWorking podcast. If you enjoyed our podcast, please like and subscribe. We would also love it if you checked out our website, which is DocWorking.com. And you can also find us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. On Instagram, we are DocWorking1, and that is with the number 1. When you check us out on social, please let us know what you would like to hear on the podcast. Your feedback really means a lot to us. And if you're a physician with a story you'd like to tell, please reach out to me at amanda@docworking.com to apply to be on the podcast. Thank you again, and we look forward to talking with you on the next episode of DocWorking, the Whole Physician Podcast.